Hi, how's it going? This is Resident Follow with YouTube. I am here to continue my read along of the Dark Shadows Daybook Triumphant, written by Patrick Craig. Dark Shadows 1001. Dark Shadows Soap Opera. Angelique takes the place of her own twin, Alexis. But can Quentin discover the truth before he destroys the wrong body? Chris Collins, Don Briscoe. Angelique finally confronts Alexis and saps her of her life energy, returning to Collinwood as her own twin. Meanwhile, Quentin continues to sense the presence of Damien Edwards' ghost. Chris visits Cyrus, who assures the lawyer that he is freely choosing to establish a 5,000 bank account for John Yeager. Cyrus later joins Quentin to destroy the body of Angelique, actually Alexis. Afterwards, he asks a reluctant Cyrus to wait in the drawing room while he fetches Alexis to make introduction. As she demurs, Cyrus transforms into Jaeger without the aid of the formula. You never would have guessed it. He's cognitive, relaxed, sharp with his cues. Nevertheless, he's also in his last episode because of unchecked drug use. Who? Don Briscoe. And his exit from the show is perhaps its quietest, darkest moment. There were two DS actors notorious for substance abuse. The other was Mitch Ryan. But while Mitch was able to address and conquer his alcoholism within a few years, restoring his career with a vengeance, Don was not so lucky. His experimentation with harder drugs included, I believe, hallucinogens. Stories abound of him coming into work and sitting in one waste paper basket too many, and that was it. I look at the bright, very ironic portrait souls he would play. Then I read reports of how intellectual he was. I consider the age. He was a sitting duck, much like Brian Wilson. You take a bright, sensitive, and intellectual man in the fine arts in the late 1960s, give him an opportunity and to expand his mind with experimental chemicals. And things like this are going to happen. Other Dark Shadows actors, Chris Pennock, Michael Stroker, engaged in similar experimentation, common for the period. And were fine, more or less. And kids don't do this at home. Their comparable survival might be attributed to a different or lesser cocktail, or the fact that Don may have had a delicate psyche in the first place. He was an incredible loss as he moved back in with his parents in a mentally precocious state. And like the aforementioned Brian Wilson, gained an impressive amount of weight over the years. Die-hard fans of Don Briscoe, of which I am one, might bristle that his CV gets overshadowed by the way he went out. But it is a cautionary image. Cautionary not only an obvious warning for drug use, but in the implied and arguable implications that decriminalization and regulation might have saved his life. For who knows what might have happened? An experiment meant it under the case of a doctor, as did Cary Grant. On this day, 1970, People's Republic of China launched its first satellite. Good thing it wasn't a hawkish, brutal dictatorship. Nope, nothing to be concerned about. Move along, move along. Um, they did though, right? I mean, they launched dictatorship. Um, I might think. So good. Episode 483, Dark Shadows soap opera. Barnabas wonders if he should, have sprung Willie after he discovered hanging out at Maggie with questionable motives and a loaded rifle. Who will be the victim of unfriendly fire, Willie or Joe? Willie, John Carlin, repeat Ferdinand. Barnabas strong arms Julia into releasing Willie from Wentworth. While he still seems to have only a vague memory and sense of identity when they take the doddering lad home, they instruct him to keep a low profile. Instead, he steals a gun and escapes as soon as possible, going to Maggie's to explain what happened the night he was shot. Joe Haskell chases him off and later warns Barnabas that if Willie pops up anywhere, he'll shoot. When Barnabas is accused of having a tenuous grip on reality, this should be Exhibit A. It's not in a lunatic fashion, just in a cosmically self-serving one. The result is a Barnabas Julia Willie episode that, like several others, plays as high comedy if titled the right way, although not in ready production. The Honeymooners set the standard for television domestic satire in this era, and once again the writers for Dark Shadows seem determined to match them. Barnabas' obliviousness to the dangers posed by Willie, Willie's innocent act, Julia's bug-eyed incredulity, Willie's 180, and Joe, who's had it up to here along the way, Barnabas, in his desperation and maybe even delusion, shamelessly gaslights Julia like a pro regarding her feelings for Willie and her culpability for his fate. The episode takes a turn, though when Joe confronts Barnabas, Fred has Barnabas float between genuinely guilty and subtly manipulative. Showmanship for others is as serious as a wrecking ball in the confrontation, and we can see him begin to slip from righteous indignation into obsessive madness by graceful inches. Carlin shines as well. As far as all-around acting goes, it's an unsung hero in the series. Each character is forced to explore something new, and the stakes remain intensely high, but never melodramatic. Shrill 483 is a tiny gem with a little of everything and has the cosmic touch that should have served as the 2012 movie's inspiration. On this day, 1968, rising gang violence in Chicago led President Johnson to call for national unity. I'm still waiting. Episode 1100 107, sorry, 100, 1117. Dark Shadow Soap Opera. It's 1107. Um, as Desmond comes home to present Quentin with a glass box housing the most curious head in all of occult lore, and Barnabas stopped himself from turning Roxanne into one of the living dead. Desmond, John Carlin. In the old house, Julia holds Barnabas at bay with a cross as he hovers over Roxanne, about to transform her. Suddenly, he asks her to drop the crucifix. 1970 era Barnabas has finally transferred his soul back to the 1980s and is in control. Eager to investigate matters at Commonwealth, Barnabas leaves Julia with Roxanne with instructions to wipe her memory of him. Unfortunately, she escapes. Meanwhile, Flora's son, Desmond, returns from abroad with a strange gift for Quentin, a preserved disembodied head in a glass. Flora is repulsed. Her concern for that evaporates when she meets Barnabas. Julia arrives and reports to Barnabas that Roxanne is missing. Conveniently, Roxanne staggers in and begins to accuse Barnabas of something terrible when she passes out. Julia goes upstairs to tend to her and continue her hypnosis. As they wait, Desmond displays great doubt for Barnabas. Julia comes back downstairs with doubts about her success. Samantha reports that Roxanne is awake and that her memory ends before meeting Barnabas. Elsewhere, at Rose Cottage, Desmond doubts the truth behind Barnabas's cover story. Flora is more concerned with the evil senses from that head. Desmond assures her that all is well. But as they leave, the head's eyes snap open and burn with iniquity. Let's run this down. We have a noble woman ready to become a vampire's slave, but the vampire is possessed by his time-traveling soul from the future, and this saves her. The future vampire then teams up with another seasoned time traveler to successfully mix an old con with hypnosis to insinuate himself back into the family and cover his early self's more impetuous tracks. Meanwhile, a disembodied head in a glass box is all too alive and clearly bent on some kind of evil. Did you get all that? If you are not hooked by the episode, if you are not propelled to the next installment of shoot out of a as if shot out of a cannon, if you think this is anything but Dark Shadows at its most exciting, go back to Grey's Anatomy. We are way, way beyond the days of Josette, Josette, Josette. Nothing was wrong with that in its way. That is as essential to creating this arc as anything else. But this is the last spurt of growth we'll see that goes beyond that. It's one thing to see Barnabas evolve through growing and suffering, but what does the evolved man do? He grew, got knocked down by Leviathan, parallel time, and Ragnarok, and now, as a mature mix of worldliness, confidence, and total humility. In other words, he's in the perfect spot to make the risk, choices, and learn the impossible lessons always lurking in the final act. I'm not sure we've been allowed to have this much unallowed fun since the wild days of Count Potokin. And is that Angelique's laughter I hear from the A few episodes away, we also say hello to my favorite evolution of the John Carlin character, Desmond. If we look at all of the characters each actor plays as metaphorically sides of the same figures, then Desmond is both as far from Willie as possible and as representative of all that's best. He's inquisitive, bold, observant, principled, and loyal. You know, all the things we will see Willie call up from himself as the series events force him to. And let's say hello to Michael McGuire as the biggest bad the series would know. Judith Zachary, it's a strange role, but when we see him acting at Miranda's trial, we know why he was cast. He went on to have a richly varied TV career, including appearance on both Dan Curtis' Waukee War miniseries, or or WOUK War miniseries. I'm sorry. Um, he was no stranger to the stage either, including appearance in the prestigious August Osage County in the Broadway run, no less. On this day in 1970, it became legal for President Nixon to sell weapons to Israel, and just in time for the holiday. Also, the world said goodbye to Edward Everett Horton, character actor and the voice of Fractured Fairy Tales. I best know him for his sensitive and nuanced portrayal of the Native American when he essayed the role of Chief Screaming Chicken on ABC's Batman. Horton was one of those grandly perceived actors screamingly gay in a time when that was what fine in a marginalized way. Very much of the Ernest Kissinger school of Bulgarian acting, he would have fit right in on Dark Shadows. I suspect, and yes, that's a compliment. Front-handed thank you. My favorite Horton part, go check him out in Busby Berkeley most serial film ever, The Gang's All Here. You'll never poo-poo Paddock again? Episode 1145, Dark Shadow Soap Opera. Quentin completes his staircase through time, while Gerard wages a covert campaign to convince Lamar, Samantha, and Daniel that he is an evil warlock. Samantha, Virginia Vestoff, repeat 30 minutes. Gerard hypnotizes Lamar into having a psychic dream where he finds further proof that Quentin is a warlock. Meanwhile, Quentin completes his time staircase and shows it to Gerard, not knowing that he will use it as further evidence against him. Although Samantha is initially sympathetic toward Quentin when she learns that Joanna has died, his coldness cancels that. She is further antagonized as she receives more and more evidence that he is an alleged warlock. She speaks to Daniel about altering the will. And although Daniel is not non-committal, he is willing to go to also listen to Gerard on the matter of Quentin. Gerard takes him to Quentin's occult lab, where he gives Daniel a vision of Quentin's attacking the late Lorna Bell. How does 1840 cram so much storytelling in 22 minutes? It's as if they know the show is headed for the gallows and they are dancing as fast as they can. And dance they did. I always enjoyed the time staircase and felt it was a sharp economical idea they happened upon a bit too late. Had the show continued, I suspect it should have been a fixture allowing stories to be told in multiple time periods at once. And why not? At one point, I tried to convince Wallace to make a makeshift mega-style Collingwood drawing room playset, which would just be the Enterprise bridge, redressed, of course. The transporter would have become the time staircase. 1840 feels more mature than most story minds because it hinges on the uneasy truces between adults who either can't stand each other or are seething with disappointment. It feels like a different type of storytelling for the show. It's almost anti-romance. I can see how the frustrated audiences, of course, after years of other flavors, I think it's a welcomed relief. And against those unions, the relationships between Barnabas and Julia and Angelique seem like bedrocks of sanity. On this day in 1970, the Soviets launched Luna 17 to the moon, and the U.S. Supreme Court said that it was okay for Massachusetts residents to not fight in undeclared wars. Good to be in Massachusetts. Meanwhile, in 1966, the cast keeps filming on location. Uh, Chapter 6, Dark Shadows, Aspirational, with fellow traveler William Peter Blatty. Episodes where the essay insists, sometimes stubbornly, that renewal, mercy, or change is still imaginable. William Peter Blatty died on January 12, 2007. He was born in 1928 and had just turned 89. The Pantheon shrinks, and we didn't just lose the state statue of a god, we lost the Colossus of Rhodes. Blatty is best known for writing The Exorcist and a string of less unsuccessful books and films. That's the story anyway. If you due to less unsuccess to that definition, you will miss out on one of the funniest, most exciting, most poetic, and the most optimistic authors of that notoriety, notoriously, yeah, notoriously bleak period. The second half of the 20th century, in all of his major works, he is an advocate for the best in man, reluctantly so. Literature, an art form that is so often strikes me as a bleak and joyless carnival, highlighting the most pedestrian of man's shortcomings, like a pirate ship sailed by Blatty. The optimism of William Peter Blatty is not mine. It is well aware of every rotten thing we can do. It has observantly wit that is so sharp and unforgiving. It's always sunny in Philadelphia sound like crap. I had known The Exorcist to be that really scary movie for people who believe that sort of thing. But then, when I was 14 and knew everything, I had the chance to see the ninth configuration on the big screen. The legend had it that you could only get prints from Blatty. The prints were always changing, and this was pretty much true. It was one of the most extraditional experiences of my life. The film details life in an asylum for generous level military officers, for genius level military officers who suffer an almost viral epidemic of madness. A very witty form of it too. First of all, it was funny in a way I'd never seen profane literature, obscene, absurdious, unpredictable, and intense. I'd rarely heard such laughter, and never at wordplay. It was the same kind of wit shown by Kinderman in The Exorcist, Dyer, Three. This all makes sense given Blatty's pre-horror career of comedy writing, the best example, the finest of the Pink Panther films, shot in dark. I'm not sure that I've ever seen a film that respected my intelligence as much, or that I've seen one like it since in tandem with the humor of often resulting with pain-wringing debate about the existence of God. Although a deviant Catholic, or devout Catholic, Blatty was brutally potent when arguing for atheism. As well, Blatty's contention through all of his mature works is that goodness is proof of God, in the same way that evil suggests a Satan. Usually people just want to argue the latter. Not only does he argue for God through goodness, by doing so, he argues for goodness. He argues not just for extraordinary goodness, proof of God, but for goodness, very necessity, 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 necessity. That sounds redundant and Pollinish, but the passion with with which he writes overcomes those shortcomings. Blatty depicts the rarity and difficulty of that kind of goodness. It's not really about head spinning and take me. It's about sack of burgers for a bun. It's about the fact that the ill need extraordinary measures to heal, and that we have it in us to love a God with love. I am far from a religious man. Ultimately, I don't think that matters. Blatty's theology is the theologically of action. It is a theology that simply makes the world a better place. And does so with a sense of hope and possibility and confidence that happens all too rarely. It has beauty and poetry, and may be some kind of result that are worth often they are not. But the problem is not with you. If anything, it's all the more reason why the fight is worth. The influence of Blatty in my life has caused me a lot of loss and pain. It has led to, yes, legions of armored and cynical people clutching their tongues at me, thanking me sap for helping so and so once more. Yet I do like the other side of that choice, the alternate of a world devoid of help, or of help limited to the moral equivalent of an extended kinky sensibility. It's not a world I want to help build. So yes, I guess there are lots of moments of Father Paris and Take Me, the joy of Laddie and his influence is in the long game. It's played with wit and awareness and iron, and most importantly love, rather than be weak. Laddie requires you to be the never quiet ex-boxer that he sees in Damien cards. The loss created by his death is balanced by the joy created in those moments, and when the extraordinary, the heroic kindness he advocated yields extraordinary results. Episode 234, Dark Shadow Soap Opera. When Dr. Woodard contemplates supernatural threats to Maggie, Sam must pit her safety against his obligation to the mysterious. Barnabas Collins, Sam Evans, David Ford, repeat 30. Barnabas chastises Willie at the end of a cane for potentially alerting others to Maggie's name. At the Evans cottage, Sam and Dave Woodard discuss Maggie's waning condition, and Woodard implies that there may be something beyond the medical that is to blame. Vicky takes over from Sam when he goes to paint Barnabas by moonlight, and she also finds that Maggie swings from thank you for supervision to potentially resisting or resistant. At the old house, Barnabas becomes restless with posing, and as his attention drifts elsewhere, Vicky and Maggie find themselves besieged by the sound of howling dogs at and the start from violently shaking doors. Vicky leaves the room to call for Burke, and afterwards finds Maggie's doors suddenly locked. For many, this is what Dark Shadows really is, as Barnabas rises in villainy and Maggie descends into victim play. In tone, this stretch of episodes creates the ultimate chicken and egg debate for fans of the show. This real cult flick Barnabas is nothing like the avuncular beard version with whom Roger leaves the kids as Quentin's haunting begins. The dissimilarity is jarring, but would we ever have gotten that hero if he had not established himself in such a memorable, wicked way? I like both sides of the character, and an episode like this reminds me of why people get hooked. The stability of Barnabas Collins is not an act. He is not a bloodthirsty European soldier posing as a suave gentleman to get his way. He is a suave gentleman, and one for whom calculated calculated brutality and intimidation are often best practices. On the frontier, don't get the world from which Barnabas arrived, dangerous natives, the constant threat of invasion, lethal winters, and untrustworthy house staff who connived for wildly unreasonable things like dignity and freedom. People like Willie and Ben are major home appliances as much as they are human. The aftermath, almost always the aftermath of Barnabas' savage management methods exist in other contexts. As well as sorry as we feel for Willie, we also remember him as a sleazy, thieving, bar-fighting, leering, vaguely potentially rapey weasel. It's not like Barnabas is knocking around Mr. Wells at the inn. This is a thug who can go toe-to-toe with Bert Devlin, and even if he knows that defeat is inevitable, goes out swinging. Willie can cower all he likes. He already brought into a world where problems are addressed like this all the time. I'm pretty sure that maritime discipline, designed similarly as much as Barnabas, would probably prefer to have Willie keel hauled. He'll have to make do with his king. Still, this doesn't mitigate the horror. Anything, the deliberate scene of tactics makes this episode effectively disturbing. Sam Evans is determined, sharp, resilient parent. If that man is no match for a would-be kidnapper, who is? Steady and sober, Vicky is similarly potent as doors shake and unseen dogs snare outside. What does Barnabas hope to gain? I suppose his powers of hypnosis are limited by wearing Maggie down sufficiently. The certainty of Barnabas' strange ways will be a relief compared to a threatening unknown. Kudos to Kathleen Lee Scott for a transitions between needy victim and dispassionate conspirator in her own torment. Dark Shadows often requires a strange feel from its actors, both Scott and Jonathan Frid, but the magnificently on display here in Q34, she's the frightened subject of mind control and the willing collaborator who wants to get her way. He's a gentleman and a general, both antitheses have elements of the other. Dark Shadows may evolve into a comic book about regret and restitution, but it begins as a study in the moral contradictions within us. Dark Shadows is literally about the unsavory implications seemingly ignored when the spotlight celebrates what we want the world to see. On this day in 1997, audiences laugh along with comedy team Eastwood and Van Cleef as they mugged their way through the Old West and did anything for a buck and Sergio zesty wrong for a few dollars more. Episode 519, Dark Shadows Self-Author. How can Angelique protect herself from the vengeance of an enemy who no longer exists? Angelique, Laura Parker, repeat 30 minutes. Liz slips further and further into Angelique's spell of death obsession. Joe is equally upset as he comes to Collingwood to see Maggie, who's been moved there. Meanwhile, as Angelique escalates her spell, the spirit of Trask strikes and ties her to a tree. After a fury exorcism, she vanishes. A hallmark of soap opera as is their ability to make you feel sympathy for terrible people. Yeah, everyone knows we need to feel real bad for Vicky when she's the most colonel slammer, or for Maggie and she gets kidnapped the umpteenth time. That's easy. You're a creep if you don't. But going right back to feeling nervous for Roger when he's interrogated by Burke, finding a strange sadness in Matthew Morgan's desire to appease the spirits, or even sometimes kind of seeing Laura as a very strange mom who just wants her kid back. Dark Shadows plays odd sympathy game. We can attribute this to writing and acting sincerely, but more than anything, we can attribute to it time with so much screen time devoted to each character. It's easy for them to have their moment for it, even if we don't want lionize them. We get a we get to appreciate the fact that each sees themselves as the hero of the show, a fact that is true in life as well. Moreover, we get a sense for the reasons why, and then a reckoning comes. We don't lose sight of the fact that they asked for it, usually at length. Laura Parker's charm, awareness, and sense of her make Angelique immediately likable, despite the many horrible things she routinely does before breakfast. But she really gets dragged over the rocks in this week of episodes, and it's too early for us to shed very many tears over that. This may explain why she's even nastier than normal just prior to Trask's exorcism. She really has it in for Liz, particularly transporting her into Chekhov's play of death obsessions. The same with David, who really wants him to know Sam's last words and get him thinking about his own last words. I'm a morbid guy, but that's a bit much even for me. This is Angelique at the height of her sadism. After all, Barnabas broke her heart. Her revenge on him is excessive, but we get it. Right now, she's just a sadist. It's triggered two things. First, it's positioned Stokes to go from a furious exposition machine to full-fledged hero when he invades his universe. Secondly, that allows Trask to be at his loopiest and for us to still kind of root for him. Angelique has become so toxic, he's catching it from skeptics as well as fundamentalists. It's hard to see how she can dig herself out of this moral hole and still be Angelique, the beauty of Dark Shadows. They pull it off, but it will be a long slog over various hot spots in 2 centuries as well as a failed marriage to get her there. It takes what it takes. As an extra, Joel Carruthers delivers another reliable, energetic, and truthful performance as Joe heals from Sam's death. This is material that would seem histrionic in the hands of another actor, but Carruthers never fails to sell the honesty in the moment. Historically, may also signal the beginning of Joe's mental degradation as the most unlikely of Angelique's victims. Episode 821, Dark Shadow Soap Opera. Can Magda escape the clutches of a gypsy king before he realizes that his new magical severed hand is a forgery? Esteban Henry Baker, repeat 30 minutes. King Johnny believes that a fake Pepe hand is the real thing and uses it as evidence to put Magda on trial. Meanwhile, a floating Pepe ponders 1969 and wakes up a chained Barnabas to threaten and menace him, generally because, well, he can. Later, we see the ghost of the man whose hand was posthumously removed to be the Pepe decoy. This cautious, this causes enough chaos in the gypsy camp that Magda escapes. Leave it to 1897 to deliver a wacky, splashy, cosmic book of gypsy lore, threats, tortures, and melancholy, melancholy, and in fine dark shadows tradition, it manages to turn 5 minutes of plot progression into 22 minutes of show. And that's what we love about it. In this sense, Dark Shadows creates some kind of temple alchemy, and the only thing that explains how they pull it off is charm. If 1897 as a video man who came to dinner, holding port in the living room and savoring the details and flourishes of storytelling ritual at its rambling best. Dark Shadows is the Orson Welles of video, Frank Turtles. If you break it down, Dark Shadows gets away with the best scene boring because the writers find inventive ways for each character to endlessly question every fact, decision, and mystery of the show. Handed to the actors, they manage to execute those moments with enough decision and discoveries. Acting's two best friends to keep what should be stale incredibly. I have very mixed feelings about the appearance of Henry Baker in the episode. He plays Esteban, King John Romano's chief soldier. Baker is a massive man who uses the guttural remnants of his mute voice to intimidation advantage. The actor can also be seen as Jackal in Caesar, Jonathan Fritz. He's also one of only two black people I recall seeing on Dark Shadows. When Magda goes running for the door, and screams when she sees him, I wondered why he was so scary. He seems friendly enough, so is this unspoken message that he's frightening? Because do I really need to say it? Is the show so lily white that the appearance of a black man in column sport inspires that kind of fear? I'm sure it would be denied and rationalized around, but was that the unconscious message back in 1969? I hope not. I hope that Magda recognizes him from the byline for his boy's life column, or that he's just tall and threateningly muscle bound. But this semantic, semantics hint at what may be an uglier truth. Politics is everywhere, my friends. Welcome to 1969 Daytime TV. On this day in 1969, Don Drysdale retired because of a shoulder injury. It's unclear whether he joined his brother in the Beverly Hills banking field. Episode 831, Dark Shadow Soap Opera. 831 is a glorious example to doubters that yes, things happen in Dark Shadows. More and more as the series goes on, yes, things happen. The episode follows through on the past and sets up more. Trask is always good, for the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Moments with his outrageous pride, and we'll tune in tomorrow. Not so much to see what happens to Quentin as to see what happens to Trask. This time, Potope also is lovable, impish as he reveals the painting, thus setting up what may be the most important piece of prop-related mythos since, well, Barnabas' portrait. Still, since the transformation portrait only shows what happens to UC2 from the waist up, what happens from the waist down? Does that age and turn into a lower part of a werewolf, only down? Does that, or only Beth knows for sure. And Amanda Harris and Daphne and some curious girls from Sioux City. And again, to realize how lucky we are to be in the glorious age of 1897, consider what the episode takes for granted. Werewolves, guns with silver bullets, hypnotism, mind control, magical paintings, and the wig on Fair David, 1897, was determined to send the kids of 1969 back to school miserable, with a fantastic summer break to have to end. Let's hope the big buses got them home to keep watching. It was a quiet day in history, although Ray Bradbury would celebrate his 49th birthday today. Bradburian characters and sentiments would pop up throughout the series, but I suspect that Quentin, that wistful Edwardian, is the most steeped in them. That he would face off against the show's most Bradburian figure, the devilish Potope, so much like a mirror, Mr. Dark, is richly appropriate. Dark Shadows, sorry, 836 Dark Shadows soap opera. When Julia risks all to save David's life from the ghost of Quentin, she learns that she has no choice but to venture backwards in time. Quentin, David Selby. David hangs at the brink of death, forcing Julia into the abandoned Hollywood. There, the ghost of Beth appears in her and describes the events that led to Quentin's death in 1897. Angelique relishes telling her Quentin's change in affection and of their subsequent engagement. Jameson finds Beth distraught at the news, and when he confronts Quentin, the argument boils into his total rejection of his uncle. Quentin is heartbroken, Later, when Beth and Quentin finally speak, their new their row ends with her shooting her former lover. This, we learn, is followed by her suicide. Quentin's obsession with blaming David into the realm of the dead, David reminds him of Jameson, and by taking him with him into death, is it his only way for him to be together, them together. Quentin's ghost appears delighted with David's demise. When he dematerializes, David dies. Stokes arrives, and it's clear that Julia must venture into the past and alter events and save the lives of Quentin, Beth, and David. Powerful, driven love stories need to be romantic, and it's touching and mature that the love story that has driven Quentin is about Jameson. After hinting around at the secrets for so long, it's generous for the series to simply lay out the truth. And it also makes for a clever way to sneak in 1897 episodes in the midst of one in 1969. We're almost reminded of Quentin's mystery and rage after muttering him so beautifully in 1897. This is a great callback to what got us started on that storyline. I know I keep coming up with the reasons to marvel at the inventiveness of the show's storyteller, but after wading through the Yargard year of 1966, it's so heartening to see the writers find newer and increasingly exciting ways to throw out the rules. The episode was shot on a quiet day, so let me get ahead of myself to the day it aired, September 8th. It's also the birthday of actor Alan Feinstein. Alan appears as the clapping guy in the striped shirt who's digging Carolyn's moves the way the very first time we visit the Blue Whale. Alan is a marvelous actor, still teaching in LA. Not only was Alan on, I think, every single series shot between 1975 and 2000, including a recurring role of Falcon Crest as Malcolm Sinclair, he was also a busy actor in New York, notably appearing as the lead in as his I got to work with Alan as his assistant in line in Buddy in a Mondo gigantic production of Amadeus, where he played Salieri in 1993. He was thrilled that anyone still knew of Dark Shadows, and is a fantastically generous teacher. He had just finished playing Mitch Ryan's son in A Long Day's Journey into Night, and the resemblance is eerie. Speaking of birthdays, August 29th is a humdinger. Ingmar Bergman, William Friedkin, Michael Jackson, Charlie Parker, Sir Richard Attenborough, Elliot Gould, Robin Leach, and most vitally Deborah von Walkenberg. She was one of the honeys on Too Close for Comfort, as well as appearing in the classic DS9 episode Past Tense, and as William Shatner Squeeze in Free Enterprise. All she was in The Warriors and The Devil's Reject. All right, guys, that's part of that is the end of chapter 5. and so, some of the beginning of chapter 6. Hope you guys have a good day.